about race, diversity, human connection, it's complicated, but it is 100% worth the effort.
And that is what we're all about. Welcome to the Let's Talk Cis podcast.
Someday we'll make it on by.
Some of these conversations are hard.
Days we only can try.
Lean into new perspectives, new experiences, new stories.
Either way, we're gonna get better.
Welcome back to the Let's Talk Cis podcast. It is the week of February 3rd, 2025. And this has been a week. Probably even the past few weeks. There's so much going on. It's so hard to keep up to speed with what is true, what's not true. We're having daily conversations trying to unpack all of it, and we are really ready to bring you into this.
So today we want to talk about a topic that I feel like everyone's talking about this topic right now. It's the conversation around DEI and MEI. And what we really want to dive into is the intersection between these two. And are they at odds? Or can they coexist? I think this is something that everyone's talking about right now, but we really want to get to the meat of this conversation.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what is DEI and what is MEI. Shantae and I, we are very experienced with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of the trainings that we've created that we go into companies, organizations, we talk about a lot of this. We take a very unique approach. But we are talking about how to help companies diversify, how to create cultures that are more inclusive.
And also,
what does equity look like in the workplace?
Also, I think a big part of what we do is once companies do add more diversity, or maybe they're not even actively adding diversity, but how can we help them find a space of psychological safety, a space where their employees can thrive and come into this company from all walks of life?
So Shantae and I have been doing this about 5 years. I feel like our whole life, in a way, we've been doing it.
Right.
But the focus on working with companies and organizations, it's been fascinating because we've seen there is this kind of social justice undertone of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We see social media's impact on it. And we also just see the real human desire to understand it and all the feelings and emotions that come from it. And I feel like watching companies and organizations over the past 5 years since 2020, it is fascinating. You see feelings of, wait, am I being forgotten? Am I being left out? There's feelings of scarcity. Well, are these inclusive practices? Do they really include everyone? Am I going to lose something if someone else is going to gain something?
Right.
And we've taken a lot of just our own approach based on research that we've done, life experiences, but we've seen DEI practices that can be harmful and can be dehumanizing.
I mean, I think that's a really important thing to note, that not all DEI practitioners have the same experience, come from the same, or reading the same research, or jumping into this with the same goals and hopes. And so I do think that there have been things that have been done in the conversation of DEI that have caused harm. And I think I can acknowledge that, and at the same time say, I have personally witnessed a lot of really, really beneficial things from DEI, and I think that there's research to back that up as well.
And not just for Black and brown people. We've seen so many benefits for all races,
Can
groups.
I pause you right there?
Yes.
Because I think that that's something we need to address, is that when we're talking about the word diversity, I do believe that many people feel like we're talking about race and sexual orientation. And it is such a broad concept. Mm-hmm. Diversity touches upon so many things. It touches upon religion, political views, socioeconomic status, culture, ethnicity, neurodivergence, exactly, yes. Gender. And so we are talking about a big scope of things that most people fall under that. We all have these, diverse aspects. And so when we are having the conversation of DEI and how to help people, a diverse population thrive, that is usually benefiting the whole.
And we're seeing research show that. And it's fascinating when you look at some of the research, because we also have to acknowledge in the very beginning, a lot of this really got big after George Floyd. Right. Now, historically, there's been a focus way beyond that.
Can I rewind a little bit?
Let's jump into kind of a historic.
In the conversation of DEI, yes. I do think it is important to say why. Why did it come to be? Why? Yes. What was the need that elicited this framework?
Which is important because I think some people are seeing right now, based on political leaders saying things about it, it feels almost like, okay, now we're going to counteract that because that wasn't great and it's causing problems in all areas. And even some of the things that are being blamed on DEI are really fascinating, and we can touch upon that later.
Yes.
And let's remove it, and let's come in with MEI, Merit, Excellence, and Intelligence, because that's the better way to do it.
Right.
And we're not looking at it like, was there a purpose before?
And has that purpose been filled?
Yes.
Or is there a continuous need? So I think as we go back and we look at from the very beginning of this country, what was the need? Women were fighting for rights. Black people who were brought over here and in enslavement were fighting for rights. So once the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, we have all these things. They were still fighting for rights. They couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote. Black people couldn't vote. And so once these rights are put into place, now people can vote. Now Black people can vote. Other things were put into place to block that, to block those rights and freedoms. So yes, you can vote, but here's the grandfather clause to actually make sure that you can't. So we were seeing active discrimination from keeping a hierarchy that was built in place. So some of these things were put in place to push back on a hierarchy, to say, no, you actually can't discriminate in that way. And in hierarchy,
I think that we have to look at the social areas. Like, we can look at history in the context of a timeline and when certain rights and laws and freedoms, but you have to look at this, where were people? Because even though, yes, now you can do this, were people around you making it easy?
no, and that's the thing.
Were they putting other restrictions or barriers in place to keep you from that? And I think that there's a lot of examples that we can use of that. But I would really ask people to go and look at Black codes, look at some of these historical pieces that kept people from progressing even when we changed the laws.
Right. And so, fast forward and businesses are subtly discriminating. And so people are having all these issues like, I felt qualified, but I went in there, as an Asian American female, or I went in and I wasn't part of that majority group and I feel like I was discriminated against. And so now we're seeing lawsuits happen, early 2000s. And so this framework is starting to solidify of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Even though we may not have had this type of terminology, there were things being put in place in companies, corporations, organizations to try to protect companies from being sued for not having fair and equal treatment.
Right.
So if we can start maybe putting practices in place, maybe trainings, and I think DEI really came about, and that terminology specifically, even though it existed before, was in 2020,
we saw
after George Floyd.
A huge pendulum swing where I feel like the world witnessed a tragedy. And we realized, again, it was, I think, glaring in everyone's faces, wow, there's a problem. We are not seeing all human life as equal and the same. And what are we going to do to counter that? And I think the pendulum swung hard at that time.
And it's important historically to always look at this pendulum and see how it swings. And right now, we are seeing the pendulum swing hard again. And we are feeling that. And there's always an emotional and social reaction and cultural reaction to those pendulums swing. And it's interesting, as we were kind of preparing to talk about this, I was listening to another podcast that was talking about this, but in reference to these like DEI and MEI in India. And it was so interesting to get a little bit of perspective that was removed, not right here in the United States, of what is currently going on right now, and understand like a caste system a little bit better. And one of the things that the podcast, which we can share in the notes, was talking about is that you can see some of this historically, that when the group on top, then all of the kind of practices and opportunities are not created to keep them that way. They will flip to more merit-based beliefs. And that's what they'll want, and that's what they'll desire. And then the groups that are on the bottom will start hyper-focusing on identity and they will point out identity to try to help people understand the power constructs around them that make them feel like they have to say, whoa, 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 this is the first Black woman to do this. This is the first gay man for this opportunity, or this or that, because they want people to see and recognize that based on the systems around me, this is unusual and this is a big deal, and it wasn't easy to get here.
Right.
And right now we're seeing a hyper focus on identity in the United States, and now we're seeing another large group come back and say, nope, we only want to focus on merit. And what does that look like? And let's talk a little bit about MEI.
Yeah.
I honestly am still trying to fully understand it. I understand the concept, but I don't know what it would look like in a company yet.
Well, here's the thing for me, as I'm kind of diving into MEI, because I feel like I have a really good grasp of DEI. So as I'm diving into MEI conceptually, I actually see some good things with it. But the problem is if it's used to replace DEI. That's because I'm seeing gaps and holes. And one of the biggest things, so again, this is merit, excellence, and intelligence. So my biggest question with this is, how are we defining these? What are we measuring people's excellence on? And what context are we losing if we are replacing DEI with that? Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think that's the question is, it feels right now like it's another counter movement to remove something and replace it. And I think my question is, what are the good things that have come from DEI? And what are good things that come from MEI?
Yes.
And are we taking time to actually discuss that? And I know that a lot of companies and organizations we've worked with, yes, they care, but a lot of it is based on productivity, performance,
and profit. Yeah.
So is MEI going to make it easier? Is it going to be less messy?
Let me say this.
Yeah.
Here are my two biggest issues. First big issue with MEI as a replacement framework for DEI is simply that, like I said, what are we measuring this against, right? And what are we losing in context? So for example, let's say we're looking at students' GPAs, and we have a student who has a 3.79, and we have another student who has a 3.99, and we're like, oh, okay, excellence, intelligence, we're taking the higher GPA, right? But in a DEI framework, it's broadening the scope that we measure. So what if the student with a 3.79 was working 2 jobs and volunteering places and had a family and all of these different things, and they are so beyond qualified because of their capability, and that student that has a 3.99 is just going to school? You know what I mean? And so it's like that the student that's doing all the many things would be considered our diverse candidate. So by saying, nope, we're doing away with that, we're going to narrow our scope of judgment based on these 3 things, and that's it.
Merit, intelligence, and excellence.
How are you measuring excellence?
Well, I think that with MEI, we lose grit.
Yeah.
I think we lose grit. And it's funny. So I watched the NFL Combine. I'm really into, because of what my husband does professionally, I love like the hero's journey in terms of athletes. And I get really excited. And one of the things I hear all the time is, yes, there's these high performers. They are cut, muscly, fast, strong. Everything looks good statistically. But they always say you can't measure grit. You can't measure how much someone wants it, their circumstances, where they've come from. And even though you can get all the numbers right and it looks like perfection in these athletes, they might go in the first round and not be the athlete that everybody thought they were, because we're measuring it one way. And it's really hard to measure grit. And one of the most surprising things that I've loved seeing working in the DEI space and kind of corporate leadership has been seeing people that probably would have been looked over before, some of those things recognized as really important qualifications, get into a company or organization and succeed. It's really exciting to see that mom that finally now we're looking at her ability to manage a home, to manage a family, that stress level. We're looking that can translate into the corporate world.
How qualifications can benefit us. And that's not a bad thing. We're not saying we're going to take someone underqualified. We're saying we're going to open the scope of what qualifications look like. And guess what? That actually benefits businesses. You have people with a broader scope of talents and abilities, and we are seeing those 3 Ps that you just mentioned. We're seeing the profit and productivity and everything. We're seeing that go up. And so for me, I think I'm really struggling with the replacement theory concept, but also what you mentioned before in it's giving us a really, really harsh bias now by thinking that if you are a diverse candidate, you are not those things. You are not intelligent. You are not excellent. You don't have merit because we have villainized the concept of DEI. And I can't sit with that. I cannot.
That is very dangerous. And I feel like I heard that growing up, and you heard it too, where it's like you just got that opportunity because you're Black.
I told my husband, I can't even count the hundreds of times I heard that I had an academic scholarship to a university because I was Black. I can't even count the amount of times I heard that.
Which doesn't make sense.
No.
Well, and it's interesting because I've heard Black people say things like, I want to get the job because I deserve it, not because of the color of my skin. But I think that's very harmful because I've seen both. I feel like we've been very involved in a lot of companies and their hiring practices where we are broadening even what they're rating almost. What is the standard? How can we expand that? And I think just who we are by nature, we're trying to expand it in a very inclusive way.
Yeah.
Beyond color of your skin.
Right.
We really want more people to have opportunities. And we also believe that those people that have those opportunities are highly qualified. And we're looking at different types of qualifications also. Is that how everyone's doing it? No. So I do think that we have to be very, very careful to say, yes, we have this perspective of holistic DEI that's very humanizing. Yeah. But that's not how it's been done.
It's not how it's always been done.
Everywhere. And there is sometimes the replacement. We just want to change the hierarchy to put a different group on top and a different group on bottom. That's very damaging.
For me, can I say, why can't we focus on removing a hierarchy? I think sometimes when we see the pendulum swing, we want to do something in opposition to. So we've had this hierarchy that was built with the white male on top, right? And people have really wanted to swing that pendulum and flip it. And I think my hope is that can we dismiss the concept of a hierarchy? I don't know. Maybe that's a utopian dream, but I think it's a worthy goal. And I'm seeing issues, again, going back to DEI and MEI, I'm seeing issues in the biases that these elicit.
Yes.
For example, in DEI, I think our goal is to diminish biased thoughts and beliefs. Our hope is that, as women are entering corporate America over the last several decades, that we will be able to see them, not have to compare them to how the white male navigates, and we can see a woman's natural capabilities and abilities as beneficial. There's a lot of biases.
Some of those even cultural differences.
Yeah, that if women come in intense in a meeting, that they're angry, that they don't know how to control their emotion, they're emotional. But a man comes in intense and he knows what he wants. Oh, he's a leader. And so these are biases that have affected us, and we're going in with DEI practices and saying, okay, we have to eliminate this. But here are the biases.
Well, we're also pushing back, I think, even on corporate culture, too.
Right, yeah.
A little bit, and saying, is this healthy? Is this the best way to work together? But in the same breath of all of this, we're seeing a lot of dehumanization. I think in the social conversation, especially on social media, surrounding this conversation. And that worries me.
Right.
It worries me that we look at a hierarchy and we're blaming people for where they are in the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yes. And I was thinking this, just about opportunity, access to things. This was the example I was chewing on before I came today. I was like, okay, so what if you have a group of kids and some kids get daily tutoring and daily help and they get mentoring, and from a young age, they're guided to succeed in the educational system. They are given the tools and the cultural awareness.
And what if they
even
come
to
from
succeed in the corporate world?
Yeah, and what if they come from a family who is aware of the culture of the corporate world and can train and mentor them to step into that?
Yes.
What are the priorities of this? What do I need to do? How do I prepare for this?
And then you have a group of kids that aren't getting that. They're not getting tutoring, they're not getting help. But then finally you see that they are falling so far behind and you want them to have these opportunities. So then you're like, okay, we're going to give them so much help right now because we want to bring it up a little bit closer to this other group. Now, this is what gets really tricky. With children, would you blame the child that was in the group that had a lot of resources and opportunity and help?
No.
And would you blame the child that didn't?
Absolutely
And then
not.
we're going to give them a lot of resource, opportunity, and help, and now we're going to blame them for that and say it's not deserving. And that is what I've been watching play out. And I wish, and maybe you and I are both full of utopian dreams of all kinds of peace and harmony, but I wish we could say, let's look more at the system.
Yeah.
And let's look more at the areas of what we can change and what we can do differently, instead of saying this group of people's bad and saying things like, oh, that's a diversity hire, or you didn't earn that, or you don't deserve to be
right
here,
there.
or you were born into that in a negative way, which maybe some of this can be true, but there's also other truths and there's other skills, and we don't need to absolutely demean all of that. We need to focus on how can we help people have opportunity to make money in this current economy right now.
Right. But I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, this whole, that's a diversity hire.
Yeah.
I feel like that is a biased belief. And we take that biased belief. Okay, so with me here. We take that biased belief and we erase DEI and we say we're just going to do MEI. And now we have this initial biased belief that if you are diverse and in these higher positions, you're a diversity hire. So then that leads to confirmation bias. Anything you see is going to confirm that. And then secondly, we have this like attribution bias, which I feel very concerned about this with MEI and how open and vague the criteria is of judgment. Is attribution bias is kind of like we have our in-group or our predominant group, and that group that is more similar to us that we connect to, we attribute their success to hard work, to grit, to excellence, to intelligence, and that's how we judge them. And the people on the outside of that, the marginalized group, we attribute it to luck. We attribute it to, maybe they had help. So then when we're going to look and measure it by these three things, merit, excellence, and intelligence, we are filled with biases already. Like we're stepping into this. If we're using this as a replacement, we're stepping into it with a very biased lens. And I'm questioning, what are we going to go back to as far as this hierarchy, and where is it going to put us?
Well, and I worry that in the current economic situation that we're in, where a lot of people are struggling right now, and they are worried about job security, keeping their jobs. People are taking on second jobs. Like there's just a lot of stress that I worry that companies aren't going to be able to sit with this from a psychological standpoint, like social, emotional, even look at outcomes, that we're going to switch really hard and fast. And I think people are going to get hurt in the meantime with all of it. And we're seeing right now companies, it's very bold and public, companies that are getting rid of their DEI programs. And some of them are letting go whole departments. It's like so many people are losing their jobs. And then if we switch to this MEI, like, what does that look like? What's the focus going to be? And are we going to lose any good that came from DEI? And it just creates, I think, in difficult times where we're worried about providing for our families, taking care, that then it's like, I don't even know where the opportunity is going to be. I don't know how it's going to affect people. And I don't believe that businesses and organizations are going to take the time to look at it from all of these ways.
Right.
The pendulum is swinging hard. And then in 5 years, we're going to see what happened, pretty much.
Here's where I'm at with this. I feel like DEI, I have seen great benefits from it, and I am not ignorant enough to say that it is perfect in its framework and practice.
Well, it's a new practice.
I'm
and
not going to say
even
that.
Criteria.
Right.
Not everyone even does it the same.
So here's where I'm at. Could this be something that we evaluate research-based evaluation on DEI and what pieces are beneficial. Here's what I've seen. I've seen that companies, whether you are actively trying to diversify right now or not, they are diverse. This is America. Like, how do you not be diverse unless you're actively trying not to and discriminating, which happens.
But we do see that diversity in different levels of the company.
Right.
Like, companies we've worked with will say, oh, yeah, like all the people that work in our factories.
Oh, yeah, we have a lot of diversity in
brown.
our factories.
But then that doesn't reflect at all in the upper leadership or the executive team. And so, anyway, go back to what you were saying. But I guess
what I'm saying is like the concept of psychological safety, belonging, inclusion, having a safe space, learning to have emotional and cultural intelligence in the workplace benefits every single person there. This is where we spend a majority of our time, is going to work. So if we don't feel like it's a safe environment, which is something that DEI practitioners should be doing, they should be supporting these inclusive efforts within companies to help them thrive. So I'm seeing these really beneficial things, and I'm saying, how can we incorporate conceptually a little more of MEI, if that's a concern for many people, into the beneficial pieces of DEI? I think I'm sick about wiping one thing away that's done so much good and has been needed. It's been needed, and saying we're going to replace it. And as we replace it, we're going to flip this hierarchy back and stick it in cement.
Shante,
I know.
This is heavy stuff.
It is.
Well, and now I want to go a little lighter, and I want to talk about what we're seeing on social media right now. Things that we're seeing from the White House, things that we're seeing the President of the United States say, and the impact that's having
lighter
on people.
Right now?
It's not lighter. It's not lighter at all. It's a little bit less research-based.
Yes.
We'll just say that. But I'm worried. I'm worried about the things that are being said. Mm-hmm. I'm worried about the impact and the harm.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that it's not thoughtful, research-based, hope for better outcomes. It feels very much, which this is my opinion, like, hey, that way made me mad and angry and I didn't like it.
So let's flip the script 100%.
Flip the script.
Yeah.
And the thing is we do have to look deeper too, because a lot of the concern that people are having right now is a lot of funding went to DEI. So much funding. And some funding was pulled from other places to focus on this. Now, this is where I think as a mom, I can really understand this.
Right.
You know, and even as growing up as a child, like if your parents are giving one kid a lot of things and not giving the other kids and saying like, well, you'll have your turn later, or, you know, your life was easier or better, so I'm not going to buy you this gift or do this thing
you get in your feelings.
You absolutely get in your feelings. And it's very human.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the part that is fascinating to me, is there are these feelings, and these feelings are real and valid. And there's people feeling like they lost things. And there's people feeling like they are in dire circumstances. They can't take care of their family. They don't have opportunities. And the focus on DEI felt, because of especially some of the performative ways that people did it with ads and beautiful people, different shades of melanin, that the focus was so much on Black and brown people that a lot of people in poverty and without were like, what about me?
I can see
what
that.
about me? And that's real. And you watch that play out on social media. Then you also see people that have had experiences where they have felt the dangers of the inequality. Their stories have not been heard. Opportunities have not happened, even because of the color of their skin or where they came from.
And it can be generational.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they've witnessed it and they're seeing it, and they see these things that come out from people in power, very public. They're like, oh, that's going to harm and hurt my community. That's going to have impact on us.
And then when it actively is, I will not sit here and lie and say the last week hasn't harmed Alexis and I directly. It has. It absolutely
We've lost
has.
Jobs, contracts. People have just been like, yeah, you've helped us in all these ways, but now we don't want it.
Yeah, we don't want it anymore. Right. And so
it affects people's livelihood. It also affects people's safety. And that's the part that's very invisible to a lot of America.
Yeah.
Is you don't hear when you're walking out of a store someone yell, go back to where you came from. We don't want you here. Or increase of bullying and the N-word and threats.
Even for our youngest, most vulnerable demographics are feeling this.
Children
are
absolutely
our kindergartners. They're so young, they're so innocent, and they are hearing things at school. Like, imagine being 5 years old and hearing other kids saying, hey, our president's going to send you back, send you out of this country. Like, it's terrifying. We are hearing racial slurs for these kids. They're coming home stressed. They're coming home stressed and worried and concerned about their future.
And children don't have the understanding or even the context. They're overhearing the news. They're probably watching you watch social media.
They're overhearing conversations.
And things that are coming out of our leaders' mouths right now. And they're trying to understand it. And they're saying it. And they're using it even against each other, even in an innocent way. It's still having impact of people feeling like they can go and just get an education, that they can send their kids to the park to play.
Yeah.
And whatever rumors of what is happening or isn't happening, people are saying things that are making, like you said, our most vulnerable, our children, feel unsafe, like they don't belong, and scared. And that's not okay.
It's not acceptable. Everyone's feeling a little chaos. There's pain, there's confusion, but we have to be able to see each other in it. We can't just close our eyes and sit in our own, oh no, this is happening to me. Like, we have to look outside and start piecing things together, because the more separated we get, the more problematic these conversations are.
And I think it's important that we see just the real human rawness of feelings of not having what you need to take care of your family.
I agree.
And I think that's really at the root of a lot of this. And I would hope that people would take the time that if they hear something, to look deeper, to do more research, and to think, how is this going to affect humans? And how is it going to maybe affect people that I don't know personally, that I don't live near? And that proximity and ability to see other people's experiences and see the impact of even some of the laws, some of the statements of people in power, it does impact people. It does harm people. It does hurt people.
And being able to see that changes how we navigate everything.
It does. It changes our conversations. And I actually think it's better. When you go into a room of people making decisions for other people, that context matters.
Context matters.
That ability to see, we make better decisions that are more humanizing for everyone. More people succeed. But when you come in with a very one-sided lens, and your group is the only hurting group, and that's all you can see, we will never make any progress. And we've seen that. And it's hard not to say, I care about my family. I care about the people that I have daily interaction with. Everybody is doing that right now. But we have to look beyond
otherwise.
that.
We don't expect otherwise, but the expectation has to be, we need to see more. Yeah.
I know that this conversation could probably go on and on.
We could go on.
And it will go on and on, because there's so many areas right now that are brand new that we're just seeing. I don't know what MEI is going to look like.
I don't
know how people are defining it. I don't know the metrics. I don't know any of that. There are, and we probably didn't really focus on this, there are some good things with it. So I think, just want everyone to sit with some of the good in both areas, challenge some of what we're hearing, especially on social media, and really try to focus and stay with human impact and how it's going to affect people. And if we don't know, then let's get curious and try to find out.
It's starting conversations. It's thinking of all the parts and pieces. It's not looking at something as the whole and thinking it's all bad. It's really diving in to understand things, to see how it applies, how it might affect other people. And at the root and the heart of all of it, focusing on humanizing and seeing everyone in this. It's a lot. It's a lot.
So much.
It's hard. It's emotional, but it's necessary.
So we will be back here every week talking about these things and how they impact humans. And it's happening daily, minute by minute.
We're living it.
And we hope that you'll join us in this conversation.
Someday we'll make it on by.
Let's Talk Sis is produced by Ross Booth for WB Productions. For more, join us on Instagram at Let's Talk Sis.
Either way, we're gonna get better.